Everything rises and falls on leadership. The ability to lead well is fueled by living your cause and purpose. This podcast will equip you with the tools to do just that. Live and lead with cause and purpose. And now, author of the book, The Anatomy of Leadership, and our host, Chris Como.
Hello and welcome to The Anatomy of Leadership. Our guest today is Cathy Iocona. She's an executive coach. Welcome, Cathy. Good to have you.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here with you.
So I'm going to read from Cathy's bio, and then I want her to add a couple things. So Cathy Iocona is the president of Living Leadership, Values Coaching and Consulting. Cathy is an experienced and strategic former healthcare system executive. She's a passionate mentor and coach with strong motivational and coaching skills. She draws from over 30 years of healthcare leadership experience to partner with healthcare professionals on their journey to excellence. She is driven to support healthcare professionals in developing actionable, practical goals, plans, and strategies geared towards achieving their career success. In the past, Cathy has led IT teams in two major healthcare provider organizations during periods of significant growth and change. She developed her passion for coaching and mentoring, which again is a strange combination in an IT person, for coaching and mentoring while participating as a workshop facilitator in a leadership development program at the healthcare system where she was. She recognized this passion, so she then became a certified professional coach in 2018. And today she coaches individuals and teams using a variety of tools, which we'll talk about today, that are designed to create self-awareness and enhance emotional intelligence. When working with teams, Cathy challenges them to transform workplace drama, to empower themselves and others to focus on outcomes and to work collaboratively to achieve those outcomes. And of course, Cathy works with us when we're blessed, Teleask Collaborative Network, but also Teleask Consulting Group, where she provides coaching, team workshops, and emotional intelligence training and assessments to member community hospice organizations. And also she serves as our fractional TCN CIO. So Cathy, welcome. What did I leave out that you want the audience to know about you?
There's very little that you left out there. I think that was pretty comprehensive. So I have made this journey, as you've said, from the IT world in healthcare to coaching and leadership development. And it's an encore career for me, and it's been very, very rewarding. And I'm just very blessed that I get to work with you, with the members of TCN and the affiliates, and get to know some people that are really invested in caring for patients. Well, so I just love what I do.
Well, Cathy, my next question to you, and again, I started this at the beginning of the show. I left it off a couple of episodes, and then actually it was a listener, and then a couple listeners followed up and were like, hey, that was really cool when you asked that question. And so I began to ask it. Now it's actually one of the favorite parts of my show. And the question is this: what is your superpower? And then I'll make one final comment. I want to hear your answer. And it's been so fascinating as people have kind of shared. And just one of my learning lessons is this is such a difficult question for people. Like, quite often we can see someone else's superpower before they could see it in themselves. And my guess is you're going to use that as a segue in a little bit. But I'd love to hear, what do you feel like is your superpower?
Yeah, you're right. It's not an easy question to answer. And the word I came up with is curiosity. And I questioned then, is that really my superpower, or is that what I'm leaning into now as a coach? And I'm really, really very focused on and trying on this journey to really have that curiosity. So why is curiosity so important for a leader? Well, it's really essential for a coach, because what it does is it enables you to suspend judgment. And that has been so valuable for me as a person and as a coach, to just not have that judgment. So if you're coaching as in a leadership role within an organization, or you're a coach like I am, just to be able to listen deeply and seek to understand. I'm constantly amazed and blessed to hear what people come up with when I just stop and listen.
I love that.
Things I would never come up with myself necessarily, So the curiosity really, really helps, especially in this role, and being curious about yourself as well. I think that, that really leads into some of the things that you've pointed out in Anatomy of Leadership, especially around self-mastery.
Wow. Well, and I'm going to butcher this quote, but the gist of the quote is something like every person is an unread book. And I love books.
Mm.
You and I were talking about my sabbatical. I read a stack of books that high because that is it's part of my love. But that metaphor has always resonated with me. Like every person is this beautiful unread book, and then that curiosity. So I don't know if that resonates, but that's what comes to me whenever I listen to you talk about your superpower.
Yeah, it really does. And it's fascinating to me. I might be thinking that you might say, oh, I'm going to go in this direction and try this action. And then you go in this direction over here. And it's like, wow, I never would have thought of that. So good thing to be curious as a leader.
That's what makes you such a unicorn. I mean, the first time you and I met, I think I said that because that is not typical of IT people. And I'm definitely not putting down IT people. I love people that work in information technology. We couldn't do our work without them. But recently, the Steve Jobs movie and where his, I don't know if it really happened in real life, but the lady that played his wife in the movie said, life is not binary, like zeros and ones. Like human beings are much more complex than that. So again, my guess is you're going to come back to that because it really does make you pretty unique that you've gotten involved in coaching, because IT is typically I don't call it black and white because there's lots of innovation, but it is a little bit more binary, so to speak. So let me set the table this way, Cathy. I've been using the framework of my book, The Anatomy of Leadership, throughout this year. I wrote the book as a meta framework for what is leadership, because I knew the chapters will only touch on the surface of the concept. So it's almost like a table of contents. So throughout our series of podcasts, we began in January of this year. We cycled through the framework. So we've gone through self-mastery, caring for others, influence, intention, cause, and purpose. And then the 7 M's of what leaders do: mission, margin, meaning management, message into the community, making people, making the organization, and mapping the future. So we cycled through all of the chapters. So now I'm able to be thoughtful of just certain aspects of the framework without really being kind of beholden to like the sequence of the chapters now that we've been through them one time. So that way I could provide some very, just what I call timely and relevant subject matter. And as I thought of great teachers and leaders, especially with potent tools in their toolbox, that puts more meat on the bone of what is leadership, I immediately thought about you, and especially your work around the dreaded drama triangle, 3 vital questions, and just all the work that David Emerald has done, as well as, of course, your own coaching, because you're in the practical learning laboratory working with many leaders as you help work with their own emotional intelligence. So I think that'll be a good jumping off point. But first, I've touched on a couple of things that I think will be helpful, kind of establishing a common lexicon. So can you introduce the dreaded drama triangle to our listeners and just kind of talk about that for a little bit?
Sure, Chris. I love to talk about it, right? So, as you said, this is based on the work of David Emerald, and his partner Donna Zajon is the other person involved with this. So, I became a certified trainer and coach for 3 vital questions. And so, David wrote 2 books, The Power of TED and 3 Vital Questions, which the subtitle is Transforming Workplace Drama. So starting in the good place we're starting here with your question is around the dreaded drama triangle, or the DDT. And that's a concept that David expanded on from the Karpman drama triangle, which has been around forever. Yeah. So the basic idea here is that as human beings, we are hardwired, we are built to react to stressors or to triggers, if you will. And when we have those reactions, it can lead to drama or conflict. So that can come from any type of situation. In the workplace, that can be something major. I'll draw on my IT background. That can be a system implementation, an EMR implementation. Causes a lot of change, causes a lot of drama and conflict potentially. or it can be something very, very small, like a pressing deadline. So essentially, there are 3 roles in the dreaded drama triangle: the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer. And I emphasized the word role or roles because these are not identities. We're not saying this person is a victim or a persecutor. These are roles that we all take on when we get involved in a drama. So I'll talk about each one of them. So the central role is the victim. And what that really is when we assume that role, our thought may be something like, why me? Why do I have to go through this? And it's a very problem focused for the victim. They're thinking about, why is this happening to me? And again, it can be very simple. It can be, why do I always pick the slowest line in the grocery store? That minor thing, right? Or it can be something huge. You've had a reorganization in your department. You're feeling maybe you're not valued. You're feeling like you don't have choices. So that's the victim role, the central role. But you feel like you're a victim, there has to be a persecutor. And that really is the problem itself. So the persecutor can be a person. We can be our own persecutors, how hard we can be on ourselves, right? Or it can be another person or another individual. And that question that you might be asking is, let's say you're in that role with yourself, you're being hard on yourself. Why do I always mess up? Why do I always do this? So it's like the blame game. That's the problem focus again in the persecutor. And then the third role, and this is one that we'll probably want to talk about a little bit more because I find it probably the most interesting of the 3. And I found that my clients feel that way as well, particularly clients in the healthcare industry. So the rescuer is the helper, whether help is needed or sought, can be phrased as the unhelpful helper. So we can rescue ourselves. You know, we'll go home after a very stressful day. Maybe we'll rescue ourselves by extra glass of wine. I'm not going to think about that anymore, that kind of thing. Or we can be the rescuer to our team as a leader by not maybe holding people accountable, by doing things for them. And what's really underneath that is, are we thinking that the person is capable of doing it themselves? And as a leader, are we growing that person and investing in them? So I just went all around that triangle, and it sounds pretty bleak, right?
Well, and it just, what strikes me is like, what's the mindset and orientation when someone's in that vortex of the drama triangle?
Oh, I love the word vortex there. That's great, Chris. You always add something, always. So that mindset or that orientation is what we're calling the problem orientation. So and we also call it the victim orientation, same thing. So it's when we are very focused on the problem instead of being focused on the outcome. So there's the alternative to the problem focus or the victim focus, which is the outcome focus, the outcome orientation or mindset. And that's where, in the wisdom of Emerald, he developed the empowerment dynamic, or TED, which is the antidote to the victim mentality or the problem mentality. It's very, very outcome focused. So would you like me to
let me
kind of share that?
Yeah, let's go there in just a second, but I'm just sitting here kind of processing what it's, and so I think sometimes saying things in different ways. And so when I hear you talk about that dreaded trauma oriented, it feels very disempowering, almost like you were stuck, you're disempowered, and always, you've been around me, I love movies, and I'll find leadership lessons. We've used this one before in some training we've done at Teleask, but The Bug's Life has so many cool leadership lessons. And there's this one scene where the leaf kind of floats down and the ants are stuck. They can't get beyond the leaf. And the leader kind of runs down and says, "Do not panic." And it's just a funny little way of kind of going, wait a minute, where am I being stuck kind of in life, or where am I letting things disempower me? And so I don't know if you'd add anything to that, but yes, I'd like you to take us now. So how do we move beyond that? How do we move to the empowerment dynamic?
Well, stuck is a great word for it, right? So when we're in that victim mentality, in that drama triangle, we do feel stuck. We feel like we have no choices, or we're not in control. We're not the driver of change. So question there, right? How do we shift?
Yeah.
How do we make that shift? And first of all, when I think about a problem and I'm very focused on that problem, I almost feel, buried in that.
Yeah.
Like it's weighty.
Mm-hmm.
Let me put it that way. It's weighty. When I start to think about the outcome, I even say that in a lighter way, right? You feel like some of the weight is being taken off of you, that you're seeking something rather than being dragged into something. So how do you shift?
Yep.
Well, first we'll talk about the roles, and then I'll talk about what it's like to be able to shift from one to the other. So the three roles are the creator, the challenger, and the coach. And the central role is the creator. And that's really where the shift comes in, to an outcome orientation. Because when you think about outcome, you may start to think what you have choices to create. And you may start to look at yourself as a creator rather than a victim. So that's the center role. And the first shift involves finding out, what do I want in this situation versus what I don't want, what I'm stuck in, as you said, the word stuck, right? What do I want in this situation? And it gives you a whole different outlook. So you can look at yourself as the creator, and this is all inside out work, right? We start with ourselves. Look at yourself as a creator and look at others as co-creating, that have the ability to create. The challenger role is in contrast to the persecutor, because the challenger wants to learn where the persecutor wants to blame. And one of the problems with the persecutor role is that the persecutor often has an intention of looking better and being the hero or making the decisions or coming up with the right answer. The challenger role wants to learn and grow and wants to see others learn and grow. You said before, the drama roles, the victim orientation sounds a little bit like disempowering, right? These are the empowerment dynamic, or TED. These are the empowering roles. This is looking at someone else as a challenger and saying, you can do this, Chris. How can you do more? How can you take the challenge that you have and create solutions? And then finally is the coaching role. And the coaching role is the better way to the rescuer role, where the rescuer is jumping in and helping when help may not be needed because maybe they don't see the abilities of the other to create. The coach role is there to support. So the question might be, how can I support you, not taking away the responsibility from you, supporting you, and having the confidence in you that you can co-create. We can co-create together. So yeah.
Wow.
So before I talk more about this and kind of tie it together a bit, What thoughts do you have?
Well, first I literally get this visual of kind of like from this to this, and I'm sorry, our listeners are just listening, but I'm taking this like in to being just more open to outward kind of focus. And we actually just did a podcast recently, and I think it was Shiraz in his book on positive intelligence, this term of going up on the balcony of your life. It feels like that's kind of critical to, like, if you're stuck and you're just feeling awful about day to day, there's probably a good chance you're stuck in that drama triangle. And like making that shift. And I don't know, that just feels, when I think about my own journey, when I listen to you, Cathy, of becoming better at going up on the balcony of my life, and like, why am I stuck in that victim mode? And why am I stuck in this kind of negative energy? I did like the word vortex, because I do think that the empowerment dynamic just feels like positive energy, and the drama triangle feels like negative energy. And like, why am I stuck in this negative energy cycle? And to go up on the balcony and like kind of observe and like, oh, that's what's going on. And what I love about this framework is it gives you a really good a framework to kind of go, oh, I see where I was stuck there, and give someone hope and possibility to go into a different direction, which maybe is a good segue. So because of this work that you're doing, you probably have seen leaders use this framework. And what have been some outcomes and examples that you've seen?
Yeah, sure. And before I even go there, Chris, I just kind of want to comment on what you said. I am familiar with positive intelligence or Shiraz's work as a way to help shift.
Yeah.
Right. We're looking to shift. And another way, and, being on the balcony is something that being able to step back and engage the thinking brain. Because what I've been talking about in the drama triangle and the anxiety reaction that we have, that's perfectly natural for us. And, I often tell or work with my coaching clients to make them aware that it's not something you can stop from happening. It's something that you can shift away from. So when we react, when something triggers the non-thinking part of our brain, the amygdala.
Or we get hijacked.
Exactly. We're not thinking. Some of the tools, like what positive intelligence can PQ, I think it's PQ.
Yep, PQ. And do like a PQ exercise.
Exercise, exactly. That is a way of shifting to our thinking brain and responding instead of reacting.
Can I make a comment to that, Cathy? Just because, I love that you took it there. And just if some of our listeners have never heard of positive intelligence, it's kind of a new body of knowledge. I mean, it's really a confluence of a couple of different schools of thought, if you will. But the idea of a PQ exercise, like something as simple as rubbing your fingers or being very aware of your feet on the floor, what you're literally trying to do. They've been proven now within our brains that habit of when you're in that bad cycle, it is literally almost you've worn a rut. And that's just a habit. And if you think about a rut, like where water is going to go, no matter every time, is going to go into that rut. So what you're trying to do is you're creating a new pathway. And so the concept of going up on the balcony is like, okay, this sucks. I don't like this about this part of my life. I don't like the way it makes me feel. So, okay, you're up on the balcony, and how can you start to create a new pathway? Okay, so I have a new pathway. Well, what do I do in that new pathway? Which is where I think you'll take us next, Cathy.
Yeah. So going back just for a moment to the other work of Emerald called the 3 Vital Questions, what we've been talking about are the first and second vital questions. So just to state what they are, the first is, what am I focused on, or where is my focus? So for a leadership team, for example, work with leadership teams in hospice, palliative care, other industries even, to be able to, as a team, say, as a team, what do we think about? How are we focused? Problem or outcome focus? And making that shift in focus and understanding that lexicon, what's the outcome we're looking for, is a really important part of that. So first vital question. The second is, how do I relate? How do I relate to myself? How do I relate to others? Am I perpetuating drama, or am I empowering myself and others to be a creator. And the third, which is really where some structure comes in, and I know from knowing you, you love structure and you really liked this. It's called a dynamic tension model. The question being, how are we going to take action? So there is a model, an action planning model, and a structure for doing that, which really brings together the outcome focus, the awareness of drama and shifting out of it to more empowered roles, as well as taking small incremental baby steps to achieve that outcome. So I had an example with a hospice organization that did a really good job of tying this together. And I'm not even 100% sure that they would realize they were following the structure, but they really, really were. So they recognized as a leadership team that holding people accountable was very difficult for them. And they saw a couple of links to the outcomes they were looking for. They saw a link to their employee engagement, and they saw a link to their quality outcomes. So they took a deeper dive into what they could do first internally as senior leaders and what they could bring to the rest of their leadership team and to their staff. So think about their outcome focus being on their employee, lost the word for a moment. Scores, employee engagement.
Okay,
employee
I was guessing
engagement. Yes, of course. And to their patient satisfaction. Think about that as the outcomes they were looking for. So the structure is this. You define an outcome clearly. There's a natural tension between the outcome that you want and the current state that you're in. And that natural tension is where drama can live. So you have to recognize the current reality, and then you can take action. So it's more or less thinking, what do I want? What do I have now? Where am I now? And what can I do? What small steps can I take? Is the way I like to present it. So anyway, in order to determine the current state, they did a survey. They recognized that rescuing was something that they personally fell into in the drama triangle, and that had significance into whether or not they were holding people accountable for performing well. So they did a survey, and you won't be surprised as to the number one and number two reasons for why their leaders didn't hold people accountable. They were asked that question. Why is it that you don't hold staff accountable at all times or often? And the number one reason was...
They're probably scared they'll lose the staff because they could...
Exactly. Exactly. Fear of turnover. So what does that do? Well, a couple of things. If you have low performers, your high performers start to think, why is that leader letting that happen, letting that go? You know, the phrase that rising tide
raises
all boats, right? It's the opposite of that, right? It can bring performance down. So that was number one. And the number two reason was fear of not being liked. Yeah, and both of those are fear-based, and everything in the drama triangle is actually fear-based. So one of the baby steps that they took to support the whole leadership team, the senior leaders brought the rest of the leadership team in to say, how can we support you? What do you need? Instead of, this is what you need. What do you need? Right? I'm going to coach that way. What do you need? And one of the baby steps they came up with was to really write some clear written performance standards that they could all support and get the outcomes that they were looking for, which, they are currently tracking and monitoring and seeing how does this work out for them. So, yeah.
Cathy, because boy, I was just on a call yesterday before you and I are taping this today. And the whole, it was kind of an open forum. It was a national meeting, a lot of peers in the hospice and palliative care space. What issues do you have? Of course, the number one issue was staffing. And so this exact subject came up of that, just the fear of, I love the term, what you permit, you promote. And so like this internal turmoil of, we know high quality care is so important to us, but yet we don't want to call people on the carpet because we're fearful because they might leave and go somewhere else. I don't know if you have a comment to that, but I see this in so many different places that fear has people paralyzed. And I love that I didn't actually make that connection earlier, that fear underlies all of the three elements within the drama triangle. But could you speak to that? Because this is such a big issue.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. The one that's hard often for people to understand is how the persecutor role could be one driven by fear. But often it's fear of not being seen as capable. It can also look like, maybe you hear the phrase sometimes, imposter syndrome. Someone who, really doesn't feel as if they have the goods to do it.
Yeah.
So overcompensating for that because of the fear of that being discovered, let's say. Right. And of course, it's easy to think about how the victim role might be a fear. It could be a fear of change. It could be a fear of, so many things, fear of losing your job if you make, a recommendation. Right. So you can see the environment itself maybe being viewed as the persecutor in that case, if it's not an open environment where people feel free to make suggestions. And, I guess the rescuer role, what's the fear there? Picking up on that fear of not being liked, fear of not being needed. And the real risk, I don't think I mentioned when I was talking about that role, but one of the real risks there is when you're giving and giving and giving, when maybe it's not required or needed, you start to maybe feel resentful, burnt out. You can often result in that. So you see a lot of these leaders in these very stressful environments where it's hard to find staff. It's hard to replace staff, the budgetary constraints, the regulatory, all of those things kind of persecuting, right? You see people just kind of almost giving up and being afraid, fearing change.
So I'm reflecting. And so is this possible? So I think I could look in my own rearview mirror and find myself in that persecutor role. And if I ask, what was I really fearful that they actually would not make the journey, or fearful that they would not learn and grow to become the best possible version of themselves. Is that possible? And then also, like I was thinking under the rescuer, fearful they're going to drop the ball and that this major task would go undone or be a mistake or something along those lines.
Yeah, sure.
Would that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Now, the fear of someone not accomplishing or growing, or still, that's probably an internal fear of, what did I do or not do?
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, maybe, something to explore.
Yeah.
Right. So what would the challenger role look like in that case? Yeah. Or how could you coach them along?
Yeah, just the term that keeps coming to me, like, because I am an organizer, like, okay, on a day-to-day basis, like, replay the movie in your head. Did you find yourself more performing your role in the drama triangle versus the empowerment dynamic? And which did I more perform? And I love that analogy years ago. I think it was a mentor said, play the movie in your head of the day or the week and kind of ask yourself, where did you find yourself? That in itself is a decentering exercise. But in the moment, if you're decentered, there's a better chance you could kind of go, where am I right now? Where am I? Am I on the empowerment dynamic, or am I getting sucked into the vortex, or am I perpetrating the drama triangle vortex at the moment? I don't know if that provokes any thoughts.
Yeah, well, that's where we really look at the shift and how do you do the shift, and being in tune with how you're feeling, what emotions are coming up can have you at least figure out, like, maybe I'm in the triangle here in some way, shape, or form. And the most powerful, and I hear this all the time from people who practice this, that the first step is to just pause and become aware. It's all about the awareness of what is happening and also the acceptance of it. It's just that so many people think that's unacceptable. So what are you doing there? You're judging yourself. So bring that curiosity that I mentioned before into it, like thinking about, what do I want here? And there's another little statement, and I know I've shared this with you before, that behind a complaint, there's a commitment. And that's where the curiosity can come in, right? So when you're feeling maybe as a victim or fearing something is going to not go right and you have to step in and do it for people, or, come up with all the ideas and direct everything, oftentimes you're really just coming from that place of, I'm so committed to this organization, to getting this right, to doing the right thing for my patients, that, I'm going to get caught in this drama. So if you can step back and understand, what am I so committed to and what do I want? And, going back to that structure a little bit, what do I want? What do I have? What's the current state? What are my strengths? What are my opportunities? What are the barriers? And then what can I take? What's that baby step, that tiny step that I can take to move toward the outcome, not all the way? I don't have to think of step 77, just 1, 2, and 3.
I want to come back to the baby step in just a second, but something that occurs to me just listening to you, and emotional intelligence has been all the rage for a while, and rage is not the right word because it almost feels like it dismisses it. It's a big part of the journey to being a better leader. But what occurs to me is that the tool of the empowerment dynamic really helps. It gives people a very practical way to grow in their emotional intelligence. Would that be accurate, or would you say that differently?
No, I totally agree with that. And that's why what I've introduced in the last year or so to my practice is using an emotional intelligence as assessment.
Okay.
Because yes, we can do a workshop. We can talk about drama, the drama roles, the empowerment dynamic, look at the structure. If we really want to understand what's going on inside, what emotional intelligence strengths do I have that I can bring to bear? What opportunities do I have? Maybe what do I need to dial up or dial down? So I'm using a tool, an emotional intelligence assessment called EQI 2.0 for this purpose. And it's really been something that my clients who want to better understand why they're coming across as a persecutor when their intention is not that, can use this tool. So I have an example to share if you'd like to. Yeah, because this is where I've tied the two things together. So the tool I use is through a company called Multi-Health Systems, and it's pretty comprehensive. And it's an assessment tool where you can do a self-assessment as well as have a 360 that aligns with that. So I had an individual who went through the workshops, the 3 Vital Questions workshops with me, with the rest of their senior leadership team. and opted to take a deeper dive through looking at emotional intelligence. And I'm going to name that person Ted, because we always name people Ted, like the empowerment dynamic, right? So Ted opted to take the assessment and as well as a 360 and work with me as a coach to tease that out. And then we related it to the work of Emerald and the 3 vital questions and how this individual was showing up. So I'll talk about that. But let's talk first about what showed up on the 360. Well, if you've ever had one, and most of us have, if we're in leadership positions, the results can be extremely jarring. To see ourselves through someone else's or other people's, our peers, direct reports, our leader, through that eye, those eyes, can be difficult for us. So the first step in that process is to really just kind of accept that and live with it for a bit, to try to get to a point where maybe I'm ready to really look at this and see what changes I might be able to make. So we did a 360, and this individual is totally committed to their organization, its mission, and very passionate about that and being a high performer. And on the self-assessment, he showed up as very high in social responsibility, which is one of the strengths, and in problem solving. Then we looked at the blind spots or the gaps from the 360. And what do we find there? Well, in addition to looking at the ratings there, what we saw was viewed as very low on impulse control. And this was a person who he believed that, he knew what he wanted to do. He knew how to get the problem solved. And here's how we're going to do it. And what particularly the peers were seeing was his way or the highway. Doesn't want to hear from us. Can't control himself from offering his opinions in a meeting. So we took that very narrow focus and we started to talk about dialing down the problem solving while dialing up the impulse to solve the problem or the impulse control. So great results, which were recognized by the peers, sitting in meetings, not being the first person to offer the idea, but actually deeply listening. So how did this relate to the drama roles? So, of course, most people, when they see their 360 results for an emotional intelligence assessment, are going to feel like a victim. If not for a moment, a week or more, right? So first step is let's have some self-compassion. Let's be curious as to what this is telling us, right? While many people are seeing themselves as a victim, for example, in the workplace, Ted thinking, we're not getting this done fast enough. Why can't we get this done? What is wrong here? Others seeing as a persecutor. Well, so making that shift, and in this case, is viewing himself and others as a creator and co-creating. That small change, even in meeting behavior, made a big impression and a big change. So that was an outcome that he was very, very proud of hearing the feedback.
I feel like it's a very practical example of taking the concept and putting a practical example. And one thing that occurred to me, it's almost like I could see it in my mind's eye as you were talking about the self-understanding and then making the shift. An interesting barometer, because we talk about energy quite a bit. We've used the energy bus. You know that, Cathy. A lot of our listeners know it, John Gordon's work. And some people read Gordon's work and oh yeah, okay, get rid of the energy vampires. But part of the whole point of the book is, what energy are you bringing? And so more than likely when you are in the drama triangle, that energy is not good. It's not having a positive impact on others and certainly not yourself. And making that shift is almost as you said it, I just felt a shift in energy, even as you described it. And my guess is it's probably very similar for that person. Like if you are operating more out of the empowerment dynamic, that there's more of a positive energy there. Now, making it probably sound a lot more binary. It probably is a little bit more of a mixed bag. But does that resonate with you and sound, because you get to observe as the coach?
Yes. Yeah. It's amazing how a small shift, and the phrase I used before when I said self-compassion, how much that has to come into it as well. And how these small shifts, kind of seeing how that lightens you up a bit. Like, you know what? It's not this huge thing that I have to do to change the perception of me. One thing that's really important in the difference between doing a self-assessment and a 360, this was a person with great intentions, right? So when we do a self-assessment, we know what our intentions are, and that's what we put in the assessment. When people are doing a 360 or when they're observing us in a situation, they have no idea what our intention is. They only can see our behavior. And add to that, they're putting an intention on us, which may or may not be
true.
What it is. So, yeah, it's, I could go on forever, and I probably have, about how fascinating it is to observe this and to see those tiny shifts and the impression that they make on yourself and others.
I think it's Stephen M. Covey that said, we judge other people by their actions, but we judge ourselves by our intentions.
Yes.
That quote has always weighed heavy on me in a good way, because it's so true. I do give myself grace based on my intentions, but then which is why this brilliance of doing that self-assessment as well as then the 360 is such a potent way to kind of journey and utilize these tools. Well, Cathy, if our listeners want to learn more about the dreaded drama triangle and 3 vital questions, where can they go?
Well, they can go to Emerald's books. Okay. The Empowerment Dynamic. And
we're going to put links for both of those.
The Power of, yes. Oh, good. So the 2 books, Exploring Emotional Intelligence, there are numerous assessments that you could take on your own, free assessments. You could, certainly have one that is facilitated and debriefed by a coach. There's lots of ways that you can explore that. There are workshops. There's an opportunity for online learning that has periodic team coaching after, watch a few or listen to a few segments, and then periodic team discussion with a leadership team. Lots of ways to pursue both emotional intelligence and 3 vital questions. And I can be reached at my telios.org email address.
Yeah, we're going to put that also in the show notes as well, Cathy, so they could actually get in touch with you.
Good.
Any final thoughts, Cathy?
Well, I guess what I've been thinking about lately, when I thought about the superpower and what it meant to me, and curiosity and suspending judgment, is, we live in a world of drama and conflict and judgment. And, I don't know if it's worse than ever, because this is the only time I've lived in that I know of anyway. And, just to practice that, not only self-compassion, but compassion, and starting with just being curious about the other person. And, it ties in so well to your self-mastery and your caring for others in the anatomy of leadership. First being curious about, like, as you said it several times today, and what's going on with me now, and then being able to see that in others.
No. So, well, Cathy, thank you for the work that you're doing. And Again, you're such a unique unicorn because someone whose
Yeah.
core competency and background in technology typically wouldn't go into this, I'll call it field. But my guess is probably you saw what we've been talking about in this whole show as you probably looked at the rearview mirror of your career, I bet. And you probably saw that showing up in the people that were driving the technology, implementing the technology, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I thought, looking in that rearview mirror, oftentimes when I share, I'd love to have a do-over in certain situations from my leadership role, but it's all about learning from it.
Amen.
And
yeah, well said. Yeah, I say that quite often. John Maxwell was the first person I ever heard say that. He's like, I want to go back and apologize for books that I read in the past. And I put him on a bit of a pedestal in my early learning journey. But when now I will say that very much, but that's not like, it's not living with regret. It's more of like saying that I'm in the learning mode and I can see it so differently now. And so if you're in that learning mode, then there's a whole lot you probably want to go back and have a do-over on. You can't.
Sure.
You'd laugh at this because, I'm always a geek reading. I read this fascinating book called The Pursuit of Destiny. And actually, based upon quantum physics and whatnot, you really can't go time travel backwards, but you can into the future, theoretically. I think that's a beautiful metaphor, actually. You can't change your past, but you can absolutely change your future. And so I drew that kind of corollary in this really kind of deep book. So again, Cathy, thank you for the work that you're doing. And to our listeners, the end of each episode, we'll share a quote, a visual, possibly create a brain bookmark and a thought prodder about our podcast subject. So it'll further your learning and growth, and hopefully it'll stick in your brain. Be sure to subscribe to the Anatomy of Leadership podcast so you don't miss an episode. Check out the book on Amazon. Tell your friends, family, coworkers about it. It's really easy. Cathy was just poking on this. It's so easy for us to rail against the world and be frustrated by things. Let's be the change we wish to see in the world. So thanks for listening to the Anatomy of Leadership. And here's our brain bookmark to close today's show.
Every person is an unread book. Be curious. Listen deeply. Seek to understand. Thank you to our Anatomy of Leadership sponsor, Dragonfly Health. Dragonfly Health is also the title sponsor for April and November 2024 Leadership Immersion courses. Dragonfly Health is a leading care-at-home data, technology, and service platform. With a 20-year history, Dragonfly Health uses advanced technology and robust analytics to manage durable medical equipment and pharmaceutical services as part of a single efficient solution for caregivers, patients, and their families. The company serves millions of patients annually across all 50 states. Thank you, Dragonfly Health, for all the great work that you do.